balance sheet ended. So to give you some more precise numbers, if my memory serves me correct, their balance sheet starts at about $4 trillion, and today it's over $8 trillion. So their balance sheet doubled in the last year and a half. What was going on? The Fed was monetizing the debt. The Fed was buying the majority of those treasuries that were issued. Or with that deficit, that means that that's money that they're spending above and beyond the taxes they're collecting. So they have to issue treasuries, right? Just like we said before, if the Fed is buying those treasuries, they're buying them with bank reserves. They're not taking those dollars out of the system to begin with. Therefore, when Janet Yellen spends that money back into the economy, she's creating additional dollars. So we had two things going on at once, these two tectonic plates, if you will. The one tectonic plate was pushing downward, and that was the commercial bank lending, because it was decreasing. While the other tectonic plate was really pushing upward. There are these cross currents. That's the way that I really like to think about it. It's not that we have inflation or deflation. We always have inflation and deflation. It's just which one is winning the game of tug of war. You see? And this tug of war is illustrated by these charts. And we all know, when it's going to the grocery store, which cross current was far more powerful over the last year and a half. And that was the cross current of the government deficit spending, the Fed monetizing, and creating more dollars on net balance in the real economy chasing goods and services. And more dollars on the balance sheet of non-bank entities. That means average people, average small businesses and mid-sized businesses that are there chasing a lower amount of goods and services. That's where you see the price inflation. All right, so now let's move forward and try to figure out what may happen in the future. If you're the Fed, if you're Jerome Powell, you're doing a lot of things right now. You're saying, okay, number one, like Jason was saying, I have to bail out the federal government. They're 130% roughly debt to GDP right now. So how do we get that debt to GDP down to a more manageable level? Well, the path of least resistance, like he was saying, is through inflation. Okay, but to get that inflation, we have to create more dollars out there circulating, chasing goods and services. Well, how do you do that if you don't control the dollar? People just think you control the dollar because you've led them to believe that through the smoke and mirrors. But you realize that it's the commercial banking system, commercial banking system lending funds. And then you know, or you realize, that other entity that you're kind of held hostage by is the federal government. So you say, okay, sure. Well, if the Republicans, the Democrats, they all kind of understand economics and they understand that I don't really control the dollar, hopefully they can continue with this deficit spending. And not only that, they've got to continue to increase the amount of deficit spending. It can't just stay at 4 trillion. It's got to go to 6 trillion, it's got to go to 8 trillion, it's got to go to 10 trillion. So you can sit there and say, okay, well, all these Congress people, all these people in Washington, D.C., they're going to understand this, and they're going to all come together, join hands and sing Kumbaya, and then I'll be able to monetize it, all this, through QE, and we'll get the inflation that we need to bring down the debt to GDP from 130% down to, let's say, 50 or 60%. And I'd also like to point out that during the 1970s, debt to GDP started in the decade around 60 or 70%. By the end of the decade, around 30%. So that just goes to show you how quickly the government can eliminate a lot of their debt burden just through inflation. By the way, they're stealing that purchasing power from the poor and the middle class. Just a quick FYI. Okay? So, if you're Jerome Powell, you understand this. What do? How on earth do you take back control over the amount of dollars that are circulating in the domestic economy? You do it through something called a central bank digital currency. So how many of you have heard the term central bank digital currency? Okay, quite a few. You've probably been watching my videos. And I want to point out that when I first started talking about a central bank digital currency in 2019, everybody told me that I was a conspiracy theorist. Oh, George, you're just a tinfoil hatter. You and those libertarians, those Austrian economists, you and your sound money. You don't know what you're talking about. Central bank digital currency. Okay, Alex Jones. That'll never happen. Nice clickbait video, fearmonger. And what do we start seeing in 2020? We start seeing the IMF start talking about central bank digital currencies. We see Jerome Powell even come out and start talking about central bank digital currencies. Now you turn into CNBC or Bloomberg, the talking heads. They're also talking about a central bank digital currency. It's become mainstream right now. It's no longer something of conspiracy theories. So the way that most people don't understand that a central bank digital currency, or we call it a digital dollar, that there's a dynamic there that's way above and beyond just the dollar being digital. Because a lot of people say, George, what's the big deal? Like the dollar's already digital. I carry around my debit card, my credit card, or something like that. I rarely carry around thousands of dollars in cash to pay for things. But here's what you don't understand. The key component of a central bank digital currency is where you have a bank account with the Fed. Just like JP Morgan, just like Goldman Sachs. Not only that, but every single entity, every single small business, this hotel, the Starbucks, everyone, every entity would have an account with the Fed. So then what they do is they can take those bank reserves that are denominated in dollars, that they actually do control, and they can start sending out stimmy checks directly, because we all have an account. Right? So then the government doesn't need to borrow, nor do the banks have to lend, in order for them to create more dollars in the system. And then what they can do is they can put a timestamp on the dollars that they give through UBI or whatever they call it, to say, listen, we're going to give you this $2,000, but you have to spend it in 30 days. And if that doesn't create the velocity they need, or the inflation they need to bail out your drunk insolvent Uncle Sam, they'll say, okay, well, it was 30 days, but now it's 15 days. Now it's 10 days. Now it's 5 days. We're giving you 2,000, here's 5,000. You see, and the Fed has an infinite balance sheet. They can have negative equity. What does it matter? So the government can't do that. The banking system can't do that because they are grounded by something called a profit and loss, where the Fed isn't. Right? So now let's take it the next step. How would the Fed determine who gets loans? Because today, you're going to Wells Fargo to get your loan for your fourplex, or whatever it is. In the future, you may have to go to Jerome Powell, or Janet Yellen, or Rayner, or whomever is in charge of the Fed, and they will be the ones that have the authority to give you the loan or not. Well, they don't care about your credit score, because they don't care about getting paid back. They don't need to be paid back, because they don't have a P&L. So how would they determine who gets the loan and what the interest rate is?
Social credit politics.
There you go. Your social score. None of you are wearing masks in here, by the way. Naughty. Because the cameras are going to pick that up, and they're going to deduct that from your social score. That's right. Or maybe it's a higher interest rate, if you're lucky. It all depends on the way the wind is blowing with the current political narrative and what groups they're trying to favor and who they're trying to really pander to. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's about buying votes. So this is the direction, in my opinion, the world is going. And I think very quickly. So as a real estate investor, you have to ask yourself, what system do you think we're going to have in the future? Is it going to be the old system, where the commercial banks are exclusively responsible for creating the additional dollars in the economy? If so, you've got to be on the deflation camp, or at least the disinflation camp, meaning that we have a big spike in inflation, but most likely next year, we're going to have inflation, but it's going to be at a lower rate. And the year after that, the lower rate, the trend line is going to go down. You've got to be in that camp. If you think that we're going to stay within the system we have right now, that hybrid system, where the commercial banks still are out there creating dollars, but a lot of it is a result of the government deficit spending, the Fed monetizing, then I think you've got to be in the camp of, we're going to have inflation, we're going to have spikes, but it's going to look very similar to the 1940s. There was a lot of financial repression in the 1940s. They pegged the yield curve, did several things that we most likely will see today. But that means that there's these short bursts of inflation, just whenever the government is able to agree on some sort of stimulus package. But then we go months where we see that, disinflation, where that spike really starts to go down because the government isn't spending as much money. And we've seen that happen over the last year and a half. Whether we look at incomes, whether we look at the price of things, whether we look at the CNBC will tell you the economy is booming, but now they'll say, well, maybe not. And if you pull up a chart of the government deficit spending and where all of the transfer payments went out, there's a direct correlation. But if you believe that we are going into a system where it revolves around a central bank digital currency, then I think you have to be in the camp with inflation, and not just transitory inflation. That inflation is going to be far more permanent, and we're going to see something like we saw in the 1970s. And just FYI, that's what I think the highest probability outcome is. That's the highest probability, is that we have this long-term inflation, because at the end of the day, the government is going to implode if we don't. That's their option. You either default on the bonds, like Jason was saying, or create this inflation. And that's the only way that they can guarantee that there's more dollars circulating, is if they control it. The only way to do that is through a central bank digital currency. So I don't know how long I've gone. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Clarify between disinflation.
Sure. So disinflation is where prices are still going up, but they're going up to a lesser degree. So let's just say that this year the inflation ran at 10%. Well, next year, if inflation runs at 5%, that would be disinflation, because if the rate of inflation went down, but prices aren't going, are still going up. They're just going up to a lesser degree.
And can you come to the microphone for questions? Anybody who has questions for George? All right, we got one coming up now. And first name and city.
City. How does the direct CBDC play out with, the power of the commercial banks? Where would they be after that?
Well, I think the Fed is kind of a backer. So what you do is you go to the commercial banks first and foremost, and then if they gave you, let's say, 5% interest rate, then you go to Jerome Powell and you say, hey, can I get a 4% interest rate from you? Or maybe you get denied by the banks, and then you go straight to Jerome Powell, and if you're one of the favored groups, then you're going to get your loan. I think that's probably how it would play out.
Other questions?
But for UBI, I think it goes straight to the Fed.
We must have more questions for George. There's got to be. Oh, yes, there are. See, I knew it. I knew it.
Quick question on
First name and city.
Jason Boston. Knowing what you know, I guess, what are you doing with your own portfolio, and where are you pushing your dollars? Is it real estate? Is it Bitcoin? Is it whatever? is it?
Yeah, I try to compartmentalize the portfolio into three categories. Number one, insurance. Number two, investments. I'd find that as assets that pay me to own them. And then number three would be speculative assets. So I think there's good asymmetry, cheap. You sell them when they're expensive, but they don't necessarily pay you to own them. So real estate, obviously the right real estate would go into that investment category, which I got 80% of my portfolio. Because, I'm not that smart, and I like to stupefy the process as much as I possibly can. And therefore, I like to buy things that make sense. I think, Hartman says this all the time. I like to buy things that make sense from day one. I like to buy things where nothing needs to happen in order for the investment to work out. Like, let's say you buy Bitcoin today. And I'm a long-term bull of Bitcoin. I like it, but I don't like it for 100% of your portfolio. I like it for a speculative component, or just a percentage of the speculative component. But in order for that investment to work out, something has to happen. The price has to go up, which is very difficult to predict. But with a rental property, nothing needs to happen. It just needs to keep doing what it's been doing. And it's, assuming you're buying a cash flowing rental property that already has a renter in there, that's cash flow positive, it just has to keep doing what it's doing, and you win. If you get the price appreciation, great. But if you don't, no big deal, because you're going to make more money, I think, with the debt than you are with the asset itself. And I don't know if Hartman's talked about that, but that's one of my key principles now when I'm looking at real estate. Is I've really tried to adjust my thinking to look at the balance sheet as though the property is the liability and the debt is actually the asset. Because going back to, when we're all growing up, you would pay an interest rate on the debt. You know that you would lose money on the debt. You're going to pay back dollars and you're actually borrowing. But you're fine doing that because you believe that the house the property is going to appreciate at a higher rate. And therefore, at the end of the day, you're going to lose money on one side, but you're going to make more money on the other side. And on net balance, you're going to be ahead. See, I think today it could be the opposite. Because prices are so high, but there's such a high probability of inflation to where you're actually getting paid the shortfall. I think that the property, you might lose money or lose purchasing power, because it may not go down in nominal terms, but it might go down in real terms just for inflation. But if it does, you're going to make even more purchasing power as long as you've got 30-year fixed rate debt. You see? So now it's just this weird upside down world where you're increasing purchasing power by owning the debt, and you may even lose a little bit of purchasing power on the property, which is potentially the liability when you look at it through that lens. And then if the property appreciates above and beyond the rate of inflation, well, then I think that's just a double whammy.
George Casey from Tehachapi, which is the last free area in California, as far as I can tell. Assuming, digital currency, right? It has a timer on it. Let's say tenant pays me rent using the digital currency. Would the timer reset for me to have to go and spend it on something else, or I get to keep it, save it, and then reinvest it?
No, I think the timer will be on UBI.
On the UBI?
Yeah, so UBI is universal basic income, and I think that's the direction we're going. So basically that means that the government sends everybody, it doesn't know who you are, sends everybody $2,000 in the mail. Well, not in the mail. Now this would just be added to your Fed account. And it'll probably just be through an app. Everyone says, well, George, how will they get all those people to sign up for an account with the Fed? Oh, easy. Just say that anyone who signs up gets a free $2,000. How many Americans do you think are going to do that? Just by downloading an app, right? And as Ron Paul says, and Milton Friedman, I think, pointed this out as well, that whatever a law is called, it usually does the complete opposite of that. So whenever I talk about this app that you'll have on the phone for your dollars at the Federal Reserve, I think they'll call it a freedom app. Because it's the most Orwellian thing you could possibly think of. But you download the Freedom app, and then they just credit you $2,000 every single month, and that's what might have a timer on it. They could probably, increase the time or decrease the time just based on them trying to fine-tune the economy the rate of inflation that they think they need. You've got to understand that we're dealing with central planners right now. And the main, if you want to understand how they see the world, it's actually very easy. They think that they are smart and you are stupid. That's just the bottom line. And therefore, they should control you for your own benefit. Because they are the intelligentsia. They are the enlightened ones. You are just the dumb rubes that don't know any different. And left to your own devices, you destroy the economy, destroy the planet, and destroy humanity. Left to your own devices, you'd actually leave your house during the lockdown. Left to your own devices, you'd keep your business open. Left to your own devices, you'd walk your dog out on the beach. Or left to your own devices, you might not inject a foreign substance into your body. You see, they think that they're smarter than you are. So if they take control of your life, it's going to benefit society and it's going to benefit you. So when you think of things through that lens, whether it's the Federal Reserve, whether it's the politicians, whether it's the World Economic Forum, whether it's the IMF, things become crystal clear. You see, so none of us would believe that we have the intelligence to figure out what the exact rate of inflation should be in a highly complex system like our economy. But you see, they do. They think that all it is just a quick formula that they can type into a computer, and the artificial intelligence will tell them that this month we need the inflation rate at 0.3%. Okay, well, we need it at 0.3%, then the time that we need to allocate people spending this money is going to be 14 days instead of 15 days. I think that's the level of micromanagement that we're not only going to see with the monetary system. I think that's the level of micromanagement, unfortunately, we're going to see them try to implement in our daily lives. But that's where we can stand up and fight. We can stand up and fight all of this. That's really the take-home message from whenever I've been speaking or whenever I've done my live streams, is right here on the road to serve. Without a doubt, we're on the road towards totalitarianism. How many of you have read that book by F.A. Hartman? If you haven't, you should. We are on the road to serfdom, but that doesn't mean that we can't get off. We still can. Why? Because there's more of us than there is of them at the end of the day. And I do not condone violence in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean that we can't stand up and fight for our freedom. Does anyone know how they brought down the Berlin Wall? They just showed up. That's right. You have a group of people that were fed up with it. God, you have taken away my freedom for far too long. And I have had enough. They went out to the wall and they wouldn't leave. But what happened is all the other people saw them do that. They said, you know what? If John's going to do it, I'm going to do it. If Susie is going to do it, I'm going to do it. And the next thing those soldiers knew that had the guns is that there were thousands of people out there, public citizens, standing up for their freedom for every one soldier. The soldiers had their guns and said, you know what, if I shoot someone, I'm dead. Literally. But what did they do? They put down the gun. And people tore down the walls. And that's exactly what we can do today. That's exactly what we can do today. We all stand together, we open our eyes, and just understand that at the end of the day, no matter how much money we have, no matter how much real estate we have, no matter how much Bitcoin we have, if we don't have freedom, we got nothing at all. You guys remember a war called the Revolutionary War? Have we heard of that? Oh yeah, the 1770s, the 1780s. Do you know that if you look back through some of the diaries of a lot of Americans during that time, they didn't refer to it as the Revolutionary War. They referred to it as the Civil War. Why? because so many Americans were still loyal to the king. They were loyalists. They were called Tories. So you had the Tories on one side, and then you had the Patriots. They were the revolutionaries on the other side. And their whole ideology, their whole belief system, what drove them, what motivated them, you can sum up with just one word. For the Tories, it was safety. They saw the British Navy and thought, my goodness, how can we give this up? They're going to keep us safe and secure. Sure, we have to deal with tyranny, but at the end of the day, we're safe. And that's worth it. Well, the Patriots, they saw that and said, oh, no. Doesn't matter how much safety that the king provides us. That is tyranny. And at the end of the day, I would rather be free to make my own decisions than to deal with the tyranny of an overreaching government. So the one word for the Tories that summed up their belief system was safety. The one word for the Patriots? Freedom. So we all have to ask ourselves today, are we a Tory or are we a Patriot? And those who stand up for individual freedom and liberty over safety, have they been on the right side of history? Absolutely. Every time. You got it. We look around at social media today and all the censorship. You have politicians. You have corporate heads. You have the global elite saying that Facebook and Twitter need to censor the things you say and the people that you listen to. How many times in history have the people that supported censorship been the good guys? 0 times. And that's what we're dealing with today. So I know we can sit here and talk about inflation and real estate, and that's all fantastic, but I think we all need to also remember the most important thing in our lives and the lives of our children and grandchildren is that today we stand up for freedom. Sorry about that.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm from Prague, living in Orlando now. Sorry, I got my patriotic blood boiling right now. Just as a side note, so my wife was born under communism.
That's right.
Czechoslovakia. We were talking about it last year under COVID. This actually is what communism looks like.
That's right.
Yeah, no.
That's right.
I mean, shortages, government's just shutting down private businesses, censorship. Yeah, it's not officially communism, but this is basically what it looks like. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. Anyway, so thank you for that. My question was actually about, you had like 3 systems up there, and the first system, the original system.
So the commercial banking system where they control the dollar creation.
Why would that be inherently deflationary? I understand why the last system would be inflationary,
Right.
but the current system, or I guess the one just before the Fed demonetizing the debt, wasn't that already inflationary because when they lower interest rates, that is what makes it inflationary? So why would that not just continue? Why wouldn't they just keep driving interest rates down to 0 or negative like they have in Europe?
Right.
Where's the deflationary case?
Or Japan.
Yeah, exactly, 10, 20 years of.
Yeah, what happened in Japan? Deflation.
Okay.
Deflation. So that's a fantastic question. So let's just go back to that chart really quick. So this is bank lending. And to your point, it's usually going up. And historically it goes up. You've got population increase, the economy expand and whatnot. But you see now it's starting to trend down significantly. And it did the same thing during the GFC because the entire system broke. Now that's a whole other topic where we have to go into the euro dollar and everything like that. But the bottom line is the consumer balance sheet is completely leveraged. Right? Meaning that the consumer debt, all-time high. Corporate debt, all-time high. Sovereign debt, all-time high. So who are you going to lend to? It's like the same thing that if I said, okay, I'm going to give you $1 $1 billion to lend, right? But all of your buddies, you know they can't pay it back. So just because you have $1 billion with a balance sheet capacity, it still doesn't mean that you're going to lend to them if there's no worthy people out there to lend to where you think you're going to get paid back. Because again, you are really grounded by a profit and loss.
Sorry, I guess they just sell mortgages on to these government-sponsored entities. So do they care if they get paid back?
Well, no, because that's going most likely to the Fed balance sheet. But you're just looking at mortgages, right? That's just one component of overall lending. So you've got to look at lending in its totality. And when you do that, you see that there's very few people out there, unless they can start selling the debt as soon as or before the ink's even dry. But you see what that goes back to is a central bank digital currency. You see what they're doing effectively, and you pointed out, is it goes to Fannie and Freddie, and they turn into what I call mortgage-backed sausage, to the mortgage-backed security. And then most likely it goes onto the Fed's balance sheet, or the Fed could buy it if they wanted to. But now what I'm talking about in the future, which is just a streamlined way of doing that, is where the Fed just gives the mortgage themselves. So it doesn't even go to the banking system, it doesn't even go through Fannie and Freddie. So they're the ones that are left holding the bag at the end of the day, which to them doesn't matter because they don't have that P&L. But see, they're not only doing that with mortgages, but they'd be doing that with car loans, they'd be doing that with credit cards, with student loans, with absolutely everything to make sure those dollars were going up. Therefore, lending was going up because that's what's creating the dollars, what could be creating the dollars. Does that make more sense? The bottom line is the reason we'd be in a deflationary environment is because there's just, you can't keep creating these loans. There's just not enough income out there to support the lending, even if the banks wanted to.
So it makes sense. Limit basically of the current.
Yeah, you keep setting a limit, and we see this in Europe, and we've definitely seen this in Japan, where the government continues to try to do everything they can, and at the end of the day, they're just pushing on a rope. I don't know they're saying that. I want to say there's a piston in the wind, but but that's basically what they're doing because the banks just flat out won't lend because they don't see an environment that's suitable to lend. And that's another thing. What are the regulations going to be? What are the taxes going to be? We're headed towards socialism. If Biden is making every single business, give people a vaccine or whatever, this is government intrusion. And, are you going to lend to an aspiring entrepreneur or someone that wants to build a factory in today's environment compared to, let's say, the 1980s or 1990s? Probably not. And that means less dollars being created by the commercial banking system.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Guillermo. I'm originally from Mexico, but living in San Diego.
All right.
Just wanted to thank you for all the research that you do and the content that you put out is really helpful for a lot of us that don't have the time or access to research it. I just wanted to ask, what is it that you do? What is your business?
Well, I retired in 2012. Yeah, I retired at the age of 38.
And now you're just researching and putting out content?
Yeah, well, when I retired in 2012, I wanted to figure out how to invest my own money. And so I first, I knew nothing about economics. I didn't know what a yield curve was. I didn't know what the Fed was. Absolutely zero. But I was in Singapore about 10 minutes before dinner date, and I was actually scrolling through YouTube, believe it or not. And I stumbled across Milton Friedman's series, Free to Choose. And that's my light bulb moment. That really just made such an impression on me. From there, I started studying like Thomas Sowell, and then I started studying investors like Jim Rogers, like Jim Grant, like Derek Casey, like Peter Schiff, and others. And that's what kind of formed my opinion on how I should invest. My favorite investor was Jim Rogers. And he says, you just got to buy low, sell high. So I looked around me at the time, this was 2012, and I said, well, okay, so my theory is I just want to buy things when they're cheap and sell them when they're expensive. I want to buy things that pay me to own them. What is cheap right now, 2012? It's real estate. So that's how I got into real estate. And then I really started investing, and in 2015, I started investing heavily in South America, more specifically Colombia. And then in 2019, I did a TV show in Colombia that was like an HG TV show around all my projects where we rehab them and do a reveal at the end and all that stuff. And then we were in the middle of season 1 and 2, and that's when I started the YouTube channel.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, Juliana, I'm going to change this time. Not Minneapolis, Brazil. So, originally from Brazil.
All
There's
right.
one in Brazil.
Cool.
We're pretty buddies there. The question is, so with the digital century, the central digital bank system, what do you think, in your opinion, you've lived in Colombia, what's going to happen with the third world countries, right? Like South America. El Salvador just announced this week that they're adopting Bitcoin for better for good. So people claim, yeah, it's another way of doing lots of corruption, which I'm sure South America is very common. What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think when you look at fiat currencies and what may happen to the dollar as far as it going down in value, it's just a cross rate against other currencies. So you have to also look at hard assets. And I think that in South America, I know specifically Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, I'm not too sure about Brazil because I haven't been there, but I would imagine that real estate has always been people's savings account. That they don't really, they're not huge on gold, they don't like stocks, definitely don't like bonds or anything like that. They just buy real estate. That is their savings account. They don't even like to keep money in the bank. So regardless of what's happening with the peso or the
That's for lack of education too, though.
Sorry?
That's for lack of education. Lots of people are uneducated, so they don't do stocks or they do bonds because they don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It might be because they're educated.
Sure.
That's good to see.
But the dynamics, though, in South America, especially for real estate, I own some properties and I'm loading them off right now. The dynamics are completely different than America. Totally different. So even though inflation is very high, we cannot look with the same lens that we look here in South America. It's just
Yeah, you can't really use the leverage in South America, that's for sure. It all depends on what your objectives are, but I think if my point is, if you're in South America and you've got hard assets denominated in the local currency, as long as you got a stable government,
which never happens.
Just never happened, yeah, that's exception happens. But if you had a stable government, then the probability of you maintaining your purchasing power, whether it's in Colombian pesos, whether it's in US dollars, whether it's in euros, whether it's yen, is very high.
Okay, cool. And this will be the last question here.
Hi, George. My name is Nick from Clovis, California, in Red City. I'm always a big fan of your YouTube channel.
Thanks.
My question to you is, given the direction that America is going towards, have you been considering Plan B for yourself?
Every day.
George has got lots of plans.
And would you care to show us your ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Every day, there's not a day, not an hour that goes by that I don't think about that. And the world is such a crazy place, and a lot of people ask me where I'm going to go after Phoenix. I'll be there until December or January. And my honest answer is I don't know. Because the world could look completely different than it looks today. So my first point is I don't think right now you can make a decision as to where you want to live for the next 10 years. There's just no way to do it with any degree of certainty. I think that you have to start to prioritize what's most important to you because you're not going to get everything. As an example, in 2019, what was really important to me was things like personal freedom, obviously, but also low taxes. Today, that's not really a priority because I only care about freedom. And I understand that, unfortunately, I'm most likely not going to get both. So you've got to prioritize right there. And number two, I think everyone needs to set a line in the sand. And that they need to do that in advance because we don't want to make emotional decisions. We don't want to make these decisions in a state of being reactionary, right? So as an example, a year or so ago, people asked me, George, what's your line in the sand? I said, if they ever come out with vaccine passports, that's when I go full on freedom mode. that's my line in the sand. That's when I execute or start really getting into that plan B, right? So I think my point is, because everyone says, oh, well, when it gets bad enough in XYZ area, well, then I'm going to leave. Well, you need to define right now what bad enough is, because you're just going to keep moving that line, right? That's just the way we are as human beings. And then when it does get bad enough, you're going to make an emotional decision. It's going to be reactionary. But if that's premeditated, then you just execute that game plan. You know, it's far better to be a year early than a day late. That's my main message there. And as far as, I'm looking at all options. I'm looking at Maltese citizenship. You know, everyone has their own unique circumstance. For me, my family is extremely important to me. And my sister lives in Dallas. I have 2 wonderful nieces. My mom is 82 years old. I just took her to the racetrack in Las Vegas last weekend. And, I want to see my mom. I want to see my family. And so I'm very concerned that if I were to leave right now and try to find that freedom spot, say Denmark or Sweden or something like that I couldn't come back in, because then the government would say, okay, now all of a sudden we have a vaccine mandate for you to come back into the United States, even though you're a U.S. citizen. And then I'm put into a position that I don't want to be in. You know, you're in a position where they say, okay, you either get the vaccine or you're never going to see your family again for the rest of your life. What do? I don't want to have to make that decision. So, and it's not like it's a great decision if you're here in the United States, because then effectively they put up a rolling wall, right? Because if they say, okay, you can't come back in, now you can't leave, well, then you can't come back in, then you still can't see your family. So there's all of these variables, but I'm considering everything, and but I think it has to start with defining what your priorities are, and also defining what that line in the sand is for you and your family, and do that in advance.
Thank you very much.
George, thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got a dinner tonight for Empowered Investor Inner Circle and collective members, and then local market specialists and lenders and so forth. So join us for that. You can tackle George with more questions, and I hope he will be on the dance floor tonight. We have our band. George, I don't know if you're a dancer or not.
Depends on how much I drink.
Yeah, that's my answer. Yeah, 2 martinis, my dancing gets really good. It used to be 3, but now my tolerance is lower, so I just get, or my judgment has changed. I'm not sure which. Good stuff. All right, well, hey, I want to invite our client, Gary, up here for a few minutes to talk a little bit about this whole idea that we've really been exploring for the last maybe 2 hours or so, which is how income property is this infinite asset. And I think that's really one of the themes of the weekend, besides empowerment, obviously, becoming an empowered investor. Gary started investing with us, I think, in about 2011 or so. And I think built his portfolio up to, I'm going to guess now, 22 to 25 properties or so. And has upgraded his properties, as he alluded to earlier, I believe, on the stage, where he started out, like a lot of us, buying those lower quality, less expensive properties, and then sort of went up a notch to just get the better quality tenants, the better quality properties, which is a very common thing investors do over the path of their investing career. So let's give Gary a warm welcome and invite him. And you got to come over here.
That was going to be Q&A. Okay, so as Jason said, I started in 2011. I've been investing for 10 years, and started with some B, C class type properties. In fact, the first property that I got, well, it was actually A class down in Texas before I met Jason and his team. The second one I got commend the cash flow looked amazing on paper. It was, we always talk about the, how much protection you have in your property. There's this ratio of cash flow to, cost, basically, purchase price or your debt service, right? So the debt coverage ratio, that's what it was, right? And you need the debt coverage ratio to be in the ones. This thing was 2.85. It was unbelievable, 2011. Like, there's nothing you can do wrong, right? It was a fourplex. I didn't even have to have one unit ready. The problem was, when you see a D or C class property like that, the reason it has such high numbers is because it's that kind of property, right? So, well, you know what? The good news is I never had to see that property perform because the alderman condemned the entire neighborhood